Are you considering divorce? Are you dealing with it now? Are you on the other side and not sure what comes next? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Divorce Do's and Don'ts Show with your host, Lisa C. Decker.
Hello and welcome back for another episode of the Divorce Do's and Don'ts Show. I'm Lisa C. Decker, your host and the CEO and founder of Divorce Town USA, the sponsor that brings you this show, as well as Divorce Money Matters. I'm a certified divorce financial analyst, a real estate collaboration specialist in divorce, and a certified amicable divorce professional. And today we are going to be discussing a very important topic of healing intergenerational trauma. You heard me right, folks. This healing can go back through the generations, go forward through generations, as we help break the cycle of pain and unhealthy relationships in marriages and families. So you want to stay tuned and hang around for the Q&A after. To help with this subject, please allow me to introduce my guests, two lovely ladies that I've known for quite a few years. Dr. Deborah Russo, and you ladies can come on camera at any time, is a licensed clinical psychologist who sees growth-minded couples desiring to build, enhance healthy, fulfilling relationships, marriages, and remarriages. Her clients often include couples in addiction recovery as well, focused on healing and growing stronger together. And I just love that because there's not a lot of people who have that focus there, Deborah. Annie Gary is a licensed clinical social worker and seasoned psychotherapist who works with teens and adults and provides therapy to individual couples, families, and groups. Her areas of expertise include mood disorders, relational strife, trauma, LGBTQ issues, and complicated grief. And she specializes in divorce recovery and is a certified parenting coordinator and mediator, a co-parent counselor, and team member of the Center for Navigating Family Change. So Dr. Russo and Annie are founding team members of Connections Relational Recovery, a virtual community focused on healing intergenerational patterns of behavior through connection, education, and practice. And welcome to the show today, both of you. I am so excited about this topic because, I've been doing a lot of research on intergenerational trauma for a book that I've been working on for some time. And I am so delighted to have you both here to talk about your experience, your knowledge, and share with our audience. Those who will be watching live, who are with us now, and those who may be watching later on YouTube. So, Deborah, let's start with you. Can you tell us what is intergenerational trauma and what do intergenerational couples trauma patterns look like? That's a mouthful right there.
Yeah. As you opened up with, Lisa, intergenerational trauma is the transmission of trauma that happens through first person being affected and impacted by a trauma of some kind that has usually severe psychological effects if unaddressed. And then through either vicariously or through direct transmission, the trauma repeats itself in the generation to come. And sometimes we see, unfortunately, the transmission of trauma through many generations. And first, I want to tell you a little bit about something called the collective trauma. And I think we can all imagine whole communities who have lived through trauma, and the trauma is passed down through their children. And communities such like war-torn communities, oppressed communities, combat survivors, oppressive acts of aggression on whole communities, whole generation genocides. There was a study done in the 60s that first brought attention to collective trauma when the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were presenting at mental health clinics with problems in significant more numbers than the general population. And that was the first recognition that there is a whole community base of trauma that is transmitted, and if unaddressed, moves from generation to generation. And the grandchildren may not have directly been impacted by the trauma, but the transmission of trauma goes on.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating work. I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. And that's why it's important that we're talking about these things. I looked at the earthquake survivors. We're talking about some deep trauma there. I hope that they're going to have a lot of mental health experts there to help them through this. And we know that things like divorce, obviously, this is the divorce do's and don'ts show. We know that when people don't do divorce well, it can have intergenerational trauma.
Yes.
And so what do those couple trauma patterns look like? How do people bring those to a relationship, and how does it affect their relationships?
Okay, so let's use a common example of addiction, because if substance is used as a coping mechanism in a family, and if the addiction in itself produces abuse, neglect, withdrawal, what a child in this family learns is that in order to attach to the one I love, I have to learn to cope in ways that aren't the most healthy. If that's not dealt with, for instance, when we see adult children of alcoholics in the next generation, if they haven't dealt with the trauma that has come from the generation before, they could very well bring it into their marriage. Mm-hmm. And what we often see in couple dynamics, it vacillates. We all in couples are on a continuum of emotional stress and challenge. But what we'll often see with a drama pattern is either a hypo-arousal or a hyper-arousal when it comes to emotion regulation. So things could look like there's a trigger for a trauma that's off the charts, but it is not in proportion to what might be happening. Mm. So we could trigger each other. And if we're not aware that there may be something coming from the past, we could act it out and repeat it in our relationships.
Interesting. So Annie, let's talk about how to heal intergenerational trauma in your couple relationship or even after a divorce. And so let's start with, what are the steps toward a partnership of connection, healing, and growth?
Well, I think that I always say that when people come into our office, things are not going well. They don't call us when things are, swimmingly. And so I find that the first step is always developing an awareness, because so many times these things they're unconscious. They're unconscious patterns. And I often refer to it as a dance, and you're in your relationship, partner A does one step and partner B does another. And then it becomes kind of this repetitive pattern. And so kind of starting with, taking a look at, well, what is it that y'all are doing that seems to get in the way of being connected? And so we kind of spend a lot of time, exploring that and trying to understand how it plays itself out. And that's kind of a stage where we're just kind of at a place where we're curious. We're not judging. We're just trying to understand exactly what seems to happen. And then by pointing out that, these are ways in which, that when you say something like this, for example, this is going to result in disconnection. If you raise your voice and you yell at your partner has this response. But then you also have to be very keyed into that sometimes someone says something and it's kind of, like Deborah was saying, it resonates really deep. It's an echo in a canyon. They stand at the top and they say something and it reverberates down really deep into this very wounded part. And sometimes we're responding to our partner in a way that really is disproportionate to what's happening in the here and now. And that's where we start to do the explore of, tell me about that. Help me to understand what about that was so deeply upsetting. Who taught you that? Where did you learn that? Where did you get to, and we got to go back to, what had happened previously. And, children do live what they learn. And in addition to, family of origin experiences, environmental experiences, things that could happen at a that happen at school that don't, they're not so influenced by the family. Often it's not only the initial trauma itself, but it's also when you grow in a family or you're in a situation where you can't talk about it. So it's not just the one traumatic event, but it's also the pattern where you're not allowed to talk about these things. You don't feel you have anyone to go to. And as a child, we're always trying to make sense of things. We don't have enough information. And so often we will go to, well, it must be me. It must be my fault. And because that's how kids make sense of things. So we kind of, recognize, and kind of bring that all out. And in the presence of the other, they're learning about, their understanding where some of this stuff comes from. And it really is, it's so wonderful because that educational piece takes the blame and lifts the shame and helps, the couple to develop that connection. Because in so many ways, both of these people, it's like they're adults, but they're acting out from their very wounded place. And so understanding how, they're both these two little kids that are trying to connect with each other, but they just don't know how. And then we give them tools as to how to do that. And then the next step is practice over and over and over.
Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part for a lot of people. So having an observer and neutral party in the room like yourselves can really help couples when they reach those moments where they don't know what to do next. And so, grateful for the work that you ladies are doing in the world. So let's go back to talking now with Deborah. And you gave us some examples of generational trauma. What are the signs and symptoms of the ways that people cope with intergenerational?
We often find that when people come to us with things like post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic depression, emotional numbing, or apathy, inability to know and connect with their emotions, that oftentimes there is a trauma that precedes those very symptoms, those clinical disorders. And so complicated grief is an example, especially when a trauma has been repeated over time. There is a normal process of grief. It's different for everybody. Grief is like an echo as well and can heal over time and can be felt over time. But those with complicated grief talk about a sorrow, a hole that never lessens, that never heals. Another symptom could be in coupleship that, when conflict comes up, when we are upset, we withdraw, we completely detach. Some people even dissociate and have panic disorders that are triggered in things between their coupleship challenges that really are from the past. So we do have to, as Annie talks about, go back and revisit the past. Others experience memory loss. It's not uncommon for adults who come in to see me. When we revisit their childhood, they may say, my whole childhood is a mystery to me. I have no memories. Yeah. So pushing down. Others could express rage and agitation very easily. There always seems to be a chip on their shoulder. There's something heavy that they're holding inside that they project outward, maybe onto others. They're not able to hold it within because it's too painful, and they may never have learned or even talked about the pain that was caused. So they may suppress.
Yeah, and some actually may not remember, as you say, for deep trauma, sexual abuse as a child or something. There's many people that literally push the memories down so far until they erupt later in life. And I have
And
seen,
these are all the way this is coping, this is surviving.
yeah. Yeah. And so it's so interesting that, the patterns that people may be playing out in their relationships and their marriages may not be about their spouse at all. It may be internal, is what I'm hearing you both say. And, each of them brings that, right? From, and trauma is relative as well. We talked about the collective trauma, and then, people who've really had very traumatic experiences. But for some people, just being ignored as a child can be traumatic, right? It doesn't have to be some grand event. We want to make that clear as well.
Right. That's right.
Absolutely.
I think this is just fascinating. So Annie, let me ask you, we want people to learn to live as themselves, to be authentic, to live authentically. What does that mean exactly? And how does it relate to this conversation overall?
Well, I think, we're talking about how in terms of trauma and coping, that oftentimes we learn behavior, we take on behaviors that when we're younger in that situation, they assist us in getting through. And, and Deborah listed like kind of numbing or, being or not really expressing an opinion about anything, or, being so you're not seen, kind of hiding, or someone who takes on the approach that they're very aggressive, overly aggressive. These are things that perhaps worked for them when they were in their situation, but they don't necessarily work in their current adult world. And so we kind of look at the things that people have taken on as an adaptation, and what parts of that seem to work, what parts of that don't seem to work. And as we assist someone with kind of getting more in touch with who their genuine sense of themselves, not the mask, not the supposed tos, not the musts, the shoulds, the have tos, but really thinking about what's important to me. What do I want? What do I need? What do I value? How do I want others to know me? How do I want to be seen? And again, this is a lot of exploration, and it takes kind of some time. And then, but we're kind of creating a space where people have the freedom to do that. They can kind of talk about it and try it on and until it feels really genuine. Because if you've been pretending for a long time, it really is kind of scary to suddenly say, that's not really how I see it. That's not really how I feel. That's not really who I am. This doesn't, it's been familiar, but it's not necessarily comfortable. And so I think it's really kind of getting in touch with that part of you that is saying, I'm not so sure if I'm really speaking my truth, really speaking to the person that I genuinely am, and taking those risks.
And then, of course,
what I'd add to
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr.
yeah, what I'd add to that is, when Annie said earlier about relearning how communication skills that, we really don't learn those skills even in school. And then we're supposed to know how to do these in relationships. The people that can trigger us the very most, because we can be so vulnerable with them and we love them. When you learn these skills and this authentic self, we have to practice over time, because with trauma, we know now research shows it not only affects us emotionally, but it's a whole body experience. It actually changes our genetics if the trauma is repeated. And, if we're in a home, for instance, where it's unpredictable, where emotions aren't allowed or talked about, and there are big traumas and there are little traumas, Lisa, as you say, people can be affected by different types of traumas. But what could happen to the brain is that now we're recoding what danger is. Many people become very hypervigilant when they've been traumatized over time. My partner is danger because my primary first adult may have been dangerous or unpredictable. So, like you were saying, yeah, it may not be about our partner, but it goes very deep to think about that. Our brain actually now signals differently what is danger and what is safe. That's a lot of work.
That is a lot of work. And that leads me to what I was going to follow up with Annie, and is perfect follow up with you as well, is that, this is not something we can do alone. Having someone who is trained and skilled and masterful like yourselves, who can lead you down this path and help you on the road to recovery and healing, is essential. Because there's going to be times that, it's going to get scary and bumpy along the way. And knowing that you have a safe place, you have a safe person, it's an act in courage. I get a lot of people who say, I don't believe in therapy. I can't go to therapy. I wasn't raised with that. And I tell them, it's an act of self-love. It takes courage to face your fears, to face the things that are wrong, that you may not even know what's wrong. But it's important, because otherwise you're going to carry this through your life, and you may pass it down to your children. And I will tell you, because of my research, because I started a book. I've been researching it and working on it for multiple years. And then I had my own trauma. It's called Shattering the Legacy of Trauma, all about intergenerational healing. And I come from a long line of trauma. And once I discovered how that can affect us, as you say, not only emotionally, but mentally and physically, the epigenetic changes that can happen, it's incredible. And I think the world needs to know that we all need to help heal each other, give each other some grace, some space. And I'm getting off on my soap opera here, folks, but I believe in this work wholeheartedly. So Annie, let me go back to you before we move on to a few more questions here. And our time is almost up. My gosh, we could talk about this for days. What is a pivotal step of making change for couples and for individuals within those relationships?
Honestly, the most pivotal step is awareness, that you cannot make any change until you're aware of where the issues lie, where the problem is. Oftentimes people will come in and they'll make we call it the presenting problem, but so often that's the tip of the iceberg. That's so, that's maybe a behavioral pattern, but that's not really the problem. The problem is the dance that they do that gets them into a spiral that they can't seem to get out of without help. And so I would say the most important step is developing the awareness of how did we get here? And you have to, I think it's important to go back and look back before, where you're going. You do have to take a few steps back to kind of before you can go forward. And as to what you were saying with regard to the trauma and, working with someone, creating that safe environment is pivotal for clients. You cannot do work with a client until you have established a relationship with them, a safe relationship that where they feel that they really, and of course they're not going to trust initially. Trust takes time to build. It's the words and the behavior being congruent over time. So you're building this relationship with people where they feel, yes, it's safe here. I can express myself. I can talk about, the things that are on my mind, and it's going to be held here in this space. And people cannot move into making changes until they feel that where they're at is going to be understood and tolerated. And I've worked with people who they didn't have the language. They didn't come from a family where feeling words were, batted around. They knew, they know they have intense feeling, but they didn't have the words to label it. And I've actually, I have a little cheat sheet and taken out, the little faces on it and kind of said, okay, this is like not just mad, sad, glad, but this is frustration, and this is annoyance, and this is disappointment, and kind of giving them the language to use to express some of these feelings that they have. So that's another example of kind of, giving some tools. But so often people just, we kind of go along and there's kind of a sense that with some folks that they're not in control of their own life. They're not making their own choices, that life is kind of happening to them. And helping people to feel empowered, to feel like they're the ones who are making choices that are good for themselves, not that it's happening to them.
I want to add something else too about a safe landing, a safe place, a safe attachment, safe. You may begin to do your healing journey, but someone else who you love may not. Whether it be a child, it be a parent, it be a loved one. And that is also a trauma. And we can't abandon ourselves if another person that we love decides not to go along on the healing journey. They get to decide how they live, be around growth-minded people, be around others that are working on healing. And that's why support groups and therapy groups are also very helpful.
Great points, ladies. I cannot believe our time is nearly up. Now, I know that you put together a list of resources, some wonderful books that folks can look into. Marcella, I believe we have a screen here coming up. There we go. And we will put this up somewhere on the website, and you'll be able to or get this. You can snap a shot of it in the replay on YouTube. But here's some great books that were recommended by the ladies, and you can find them also. Why don't you give everyone your contact information, how they can reach you, Dr. Deborah?
Yes, if you want to reach me, you can go to my website, couplslaunch.com.
Couplslaunch.com. Love it. And Annie, how about you? How can folks reach you?
Annie Gary, LCSW.com.
Annie Gary, LCSW.com. Yes.
And also Annie has a free women's divorce support group. Annie, I probably thought you weren't going to mention it, so I'm going to mention it.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes. I do. It's through the program Visions Anew, and visionsanew.com does link back to my page. I have a divorce support group that is for women only who are contemplating midst or post-divorce, and we meet twice a month. And it's been a wonderful support, very necessary support for people who are going through divorce.
And I can't let us forget connectionsrelationalrecovery.com, which is the community where people come to practice their skills and heal.
And that was my last thing I was going to ask you about. Where can they find that? Repeat that one more time, Deborah.
Yes, connectionsrelationalrecovery.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being guest today. It's been wonderful to see you both. It's been some time. We need to have lunch and catch up. And I hope that the folks who are watching this later on will enjoy it as much as I have. Now, before we go, I'm going to share with you some of the resources that we have available for you here at Divorcetown, divorcetownusa.com. You can download the Divorcetown USA roadmap you see here. which includes an ebook that explains each of your options, helps you understand which is best for you and your family, and outlines the other professionals and or resources you may need along the way. And we also offer many free articles, videos, and other free resources to help you have a saner, smarter, savvier divorce. In the marketplace at Divorce Town, we have designed this to bring you some of the best books, products, and resources that we found through the years to help you through your divorce so you can thrive long after. And featuring the sections you see here, we have something for everyone. I think we're a little ahead of ourselves there. I'm not sure what happened. We also sponsor a virtual divorce help and hope support group through meetup.com, and we meet twice a month via Zoom. You can find those times and dates on the events section in the Divorce Town USA site. And at Divorce Money Matters, you can get a free divorce financial fitness kit. So we hope you found this week's episode of the Divorce Do's and Don't Show helpful. We look forward to seeing you all next week and every week as we continue to improve the way the world divorces one family at a time.